So will gun control even make it on the candidates' hit list? If not, what will drive either candidate straight into the White House and the world's top job? My panel joins me now. Tom Switzer is Research Associate with the US Studies Centre at Sydney Uni and editor of The Spectator Australia. Dr David Smith is lecturer at Sydney University's US Studies Centre. And in our Canberra studio, Dr John Hart, reader in political science at ANU, joins us. Welcome to you all. Now, John Hart, if I could start with you in Canberra. The Colorado suspect bought this large stockpile of ammunition on the internet legally. He appeared to be unhindered by background checks or federal control. Gun control groups say how easy it is, therefore, to get this huge arsenal. Pro-gun groups say stricter controls wouldn't make the nation safer, but would only restrict constitutional rights. Will either presidential candidate get tough on this, do you think?
I don't think so, because there's no mileage in it. There's simply no majority in the United States for significantly tougher gun control laws. And it's not something that a presidential candidate can do on his own. Legislation would need to be passed by Congress, and the United States Congress, at least one house of it at the moment, is controlled by the Republican Party. The Republican Party is very closely allied with the gun lobby. Even some Democrats are and would not vote for tougher gun control laws, and those Democrats that aren't are simply risk averse. They're running scared of the power of the gun lobby in elections. So the prospects of any tough gun control laws are virtually nil. And why will presidential candidates run the risk of offending some voters? And there are a lot of voters who believe in the right to bear arms. It's a fundamental right as far as they're concerned. There are a lot of voters who, every time there's an incident like the one in Colorado, will say, well, we need guns to protect ourselves. It's a rights issue, it's a practical issue.
All right, I can't believe how many...
There's no way through it at the moment.
Yeah, I can't believe how many times in the media just in the last day or so I've heard that exact sentiment. I will now buy a gun, they say, because of this event. I want to show a photo that's been published in the US media just over the weekend, and that is a photo of the gun. It was the gun that was like the one that was used in this terrible event, and it was photographed in a store just blocks from the cinema just yesterday. So it's extraordinary that this is still for sale. David Smith, this issue does depend a lot, obviously, on the states. But why couldn't President Obama show the sort of courage and audacity that John Howard showed when he was Prime Minister in Australia when we had a similar event?
Well, because he's probably thinking of the kind of courage that Al Gore showed in 1999 when he cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate to extend a ban on assault weapons, and that really came back to hurt him in the 2000 presidential election. I mean, George Bush was able to flip states like West Virginia from blue to red by spending a lot of time there talking about how the Democrats wanted to take people's guns away. And Obama has been utterly cautious on gun control ever since he got elected. He made some vague promise in 2008 that he would want to re-implement that ban on assault weapons, but he's been utterly silent since then. But still, the NRA keeps saying that Barack Obama is a threat to people's Second Amendment rights, so he just doesn't want to inflame that any further.
Tom Switzer, do you see it as simply a matter of the Democrats, as our two guests have said, essentially, are too scared about this issue, and Republicans are perhaps too close to the gun lobby and the NRA?
There's some truth to that, Helen, although one should bear in mind the latest opinion polls on this subject about guns. 45% of Americans have a gun at home, according to Gallup last year. Now, 45%, you think about that.
What is it, 268 million?
But you'd be pretty naive to think that they're all Republican voters. There's a good significant swag of Democrat voters, particularly in those rural states that David just mentioned. But the other thing to bear in mind when it comes to public opinion polls is that the support for tough gun regulations has declined dramatically during the course of the last 20 years. In 1990, support for tougher regulations was around 75 to 80% almost. These days it's now down to about 40%. So it's declined by 50% in the course of the last 20 years. And I think that both politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, are well aware that the right to bear arms, this constitutional amendment, the Second Amendment, is as American as apple pie, if you like. So it'd be a pretty brave politician to take on that consensus.
David, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, the Second Amendment hasn't actually always been interpreted that way, though. I mean, it was really the conservative wave that overtook the Republican Party in the 60s and 70s that encouraged this interpretation of it as an individual right, as opposed to something that was supposed to be there to protect the right of the people to raise a militia.
Yes.
Actually, up until the 1960s and 70s, Conservatives and the National Rifle Association agreed that this right was basically about militias, not about the individual right to bear arms. And the NRA went along with gun control restrictions in the wake of the assassination of both Kennedys to try and restrict the flow of arms.
But the point, though, is that it's so deeply inbred, I think, in the national consciousness that it would be very hard to change that now, I
Yeah, so
suspect.
in fact, you all really agree that this is not going to become
That's
a
right.
huge
It's not going to be
campaign issue at all. But one thing that is a big campaign issue, John Hart, in Canberra, is the economy. Now, it is struggling still. There seem to be these green shoots and then it sputters and stutters again. Despite, you know, some pleasing figures out of the US on housing starts, albeit it was from a very low base and there's still this huge oversupply of houses, the economy and the unemployment certainly is stubbornly high. Could this be the death knell for President Obama's presidency?
Well, the conventional wisdom would say that any president who's presiding over an unemployment rate of excess of 8% in the last 6 months before an election is going to be beaten. That would have been fairly true, but this is a very odd election. The opinion polls are showing a very tight race in the face of tough economy. There's not a great deal of enthusiasm, even amongst Republican voters, behind Mitt Romney's candidacy. And what you'd have to say so far is that Mitt Romney has not provided much of an alternative to Obama's approach to the economic crisis.
So, but how vulnerable?
Obama's line
All right,
has-
we'll talk
has
about Mitt
been-
Romney in a minute, but how vulnerable do you think is President Obama?
Look, I think Obama's been vulnerable since the last election. And my reason is because his electoral college base is a lot weaker than many people who saw the last elections in terms of massive euphoria behind his candidacy actually realise. I mean, he needs 270 electoral college votes to win. In 2008, he won the electoral college with 112 votes in excess of 95 votes in excess of the 270.
What he needed, yeah.
Those 95 votes came from a number of very, very marginal states, states where either his margin of victory was under 5% or his share of the vote was under 55%. I mean, he could easily lose that 95 electoral college votes. He's already lost 6 because of the electoral college redistribution as a result of the last census. So I think he's been vulnerable for the last 4 years. I mean, there was no hope that that kind of euphoria that accompanied the last election victory would last through a period of government of 4 years.
Yeah, David Smith, it is interesting. This was the president who did come in on this wave of euphoria. He was the president of, you know, hope and yes, we can. Do you think he's vulnerable?
I think he is vulnerable, but at the same time, he seems to be less vulnerable than any president in history has been to bad economic figures. I mean, we look at these constant bad economic reports that come out. They never seem to damage his standings in the polls. His approval rating has never been below 40%, whereas other presidents who presided over similar unemployment have been down in the 20s. And I think that if we look at opinion polls about who is to blame for the economy, we see that more Americans still blame George W. Bush for the current state of the economy. More Americans still blame both parties in Congress, and more Americans still blame Wall Street bankers. So even though he's presiding over this terrible economy, Obama just isn't getting as much of the blame as presidents normally do. So he is vulnerable in one sense, but he seems to be remarkably resilient in another sense.
Tom Switzer, would you agree with that assessment?
Some truth to what David says. I do think, though, any starting point when you talk about American politics in the last few years has to go back to this basic premise that Americans are in a very foul mood. You know, more than 65% of Americans think their country is heading in the wrong direction. a significant majority of Americans think that their economy is worse off as a result of Barack Obama's policies, and a significant segment of Americans think that America is heading into serious long-term decline. Now, that's not a good environment on which to campaign for re-election. I do agree that Mitt Romney is a weak candidate. I think John and David are right about his vulnerabilities, and he showed that during the Republican primaries. But nevertheless, this will go right down on the wire, and it'll come down to key independents in those key battleground states.
All right, well, we're going to take a short break, but there's plenty more issues that I want to cover. So we'll be back with more of Late Agenda in just a moment.
It's your time to walk in the steps of soldiers, taste exotic foods, to make new friends, discover a rich and beautiful culture, and create lasting memories. It's time to take your time. Enjoy a 12-day China Highlights tour, visiting Beijing, Xi'an, Guilin and Shanghai from only $2,799. If you're thinking of a holiday in China, think China Holidays. Call 1300-2China or go online today.
JB Hi-Fi, Australia's largest home entertainment retailer, with smashing prices on TVs for all sports fans. Like this Panasonic 60-inch Full HD 3D Plasma TV racing out for $1,998. Watch the action on a Panasonic 47-inch Full HD 3D LED LCD TV tossed out for $1,496. Catch it all on the Samsung 55-inch Dual Core TV, yours for $3,996. Don't miss a thing on the Samsung 40-inch Full HD LED LCD 100Hz TV, yours for $1,196. TV prices are hard to beat at JB Hi-Fi. JB, you've done it again.
Why do things happen the way they happen? What are all the events behind the event? Cause and effect. It's a powerful force. It's what makes the real world affect the financial markets, creating opportunities you can take advantage of. With IG Markets, Australia's #1 CFD provider. So if you're curious about the way one thing leads to another, if you have that kind of mind, take some time and get informed. Figure out all the connections, understand why, and take a position. IG Markets. Get thinking.
Who makes all the little things? The bracelets and the lights? Who makes rain disappear? And budgie smugglers? The cups that make lattes? Who makes decisions? Puts sparkles on dresses and turns us orange? Who makes playthings, spray things and snow? Who makes snow? And who really cares who makes all of this? We do. Because we see Australian business.
Welcome back to Late Agenda, and my guests tonight are Tom Switzer, editor of Spectator Australia and from the US Study Centre. We also have Dr David Smith with us, lecturer at the US Study Centre in International Politics, and in our Canberra studio, Dr John Hart from the ANU. Tom Switzer, it does seem extraordinary to many Australians that President Obama could lose. I mean, he's incredibly popular here, even though obviously we don't vote. But people haven't kind of cottoned on to this fact that certainly the economy's bad, but they just sort of assume that he's going to get a second term.
And in fairness to Barack Obama, he has presided over, all things considered, a pretty effective foreign policy agenda. There haven't been any major diplomatic stoushes on his watch. So you're quite right. I think all things considered, it's understandable why Australians would have that view of Barack Obama. But look, he's in all sorts of trouble, and it all gets down to one thing. thing, the economy.
Right, but he would no doubt argue, as he's been trying to for some years, to say this all started from the GFC. The GFC started before he was elected.
Yeah, the problem he's got, though, is that his economic team in early 2009, when they were trying to justify to Congress the big spending stimulus package, that it would lead to an unemployment rate of 6%. So he's raised expectations. It's still stubbornly high at 8.2%.
All right, David Smith, do you think it is all about the economy, or is it in fact this, you know, it was mentioned about the legislative kind of inability to be constructive and to get the legislative program through? And
well, the legislative inability to be constructive is a huge part of the problem with the economy at the moment, and the electorate realises that. I mean, we had this grotesque spectacle last year of Congress actually threatening to send America into default, and that certainly didn't help with economic recovery. But there's an interesting thing that has happened in the last few years, which is that the United States is so polarised that even though the terrible state of the economy clearly matters, it doesn't seem to matter as much as it did previously. And for both candidates, what this is going to be about is turnout. Mitt Romney is going to want the electorate to look the same as it did in 2010. So he wants older, whiter, more conservative people voting.
Which is when the midterm elections favoured the
Exactly.
Republicans.
Obama wants it to look the same as it did in 2008, which is younger people voting and more minorities. So both of them really have to play to their own bases. And Obama's got problems here because his presidency really hasn't been that inspiring to the Democratic base over the last 4 years. And Romney's got huge problems as well. There's a substantial part of the Republican debate that thinks he's some kind of cultist wearing magic underwear. So both of them have major difficulties to overcome with their own bases.
All right, we're still going to get on to Romney in a moment. But David Smith, I mean, do you think it, John Hart, do you think it has little to do with the economy and little to do with Obama's popularity, but you said before it has everything to do with the Electoral College votes and that he may be in trouble on that score?
Well, the election turns on the Electoral College vote, and I do think Obama is incredibly vulnerable. The 95 vote margin that he had in 2008 depended on a handful of states that he won in 2008 that John Kerry, the Democratic candidate, didn't carry in 2004, and they're all highly marginal and they could go. But the economy has always been a fundamental feature in explaining elections in America, but other things matter. I mean, the candidates matter. And to get on to Mitt Romney, Romney has terrific vulnerabilities. I mean, there was a poll in the Washington Post at the beginning of this month that showed a majority of Republican voters who supported Romney were supporting Romney because they hated Obama. In fact,
so
there
you
were
mean it was hardly a vote of confidence in Romney himself.
Yeah, and when you look at his primary performance, he did very, very poorly with the Republican base in the South. Apart from Florida, he didn't win a single southern state until Santorum dropped out of the race. And that was a very, very important comment, I think, by Republican rank-and-file voters on the Republican heir apparent, and I think it's worrying. I mean, the Republican Party is strong in the South, but some of those marginal states that will make the difference in the Electoral College, like North Carolina, like Virginia, are also in the South, Florida, and I think it matters a great deal.
John Hart, it was interesting because Mitt Romney, his basic pitch so far has been, I've been a successful businessman, you can trust me with the economy. Now, in recent weeks, certainly before the Colorado massacre, Obama's people and advertising was hammering him on that very point. How do you regard that strategy of Romney's first?
Look, it's been a very negative campaign from Obama so far, but they are trying to structure the public image of Romney, and it certainly resonates. Romney did a lot to help it along in the primaries by being very evasive about his tax returns, about publishing his tax returns very late on and then only for a couple of years, saying nothing about the amount of money he's got stashed in overseas accounts. It's looking bad. I think they're painting Romney as someone to be suspicious of. It's part of a negative campaign, but you know, negative campaigning works.
Yeah, Tom Switzer, it is interesting. I mean, being a successful business person, he was a very clever and successful private equity entrepreneur. That should be a positive. Is the Obama campaign taking a risk, or is it working to try and paint him as something suspicious?
Well, clearly the president himself and a lot of his Democratic strategists think that this financial and business success of Romney's is going to be a political weakness for them. For him, I should say. But nevertheless, there are risks involved. On the one hand, it may well be a good way of trying to reach out to a lot of working class Democrat voters in some of those swing states like West Virginia, who, as Obama once put it during the primaries, cling to their guns and Bibles. This might be an effective way of reaching out to them. But the risk is this. Class warfare, such as it is, doesn't play well in middle America. And the other point to bear in mind is that the Democratic Party is home to a lot of big donations from wealthy hedge fund managers and venture capitalists. So there are big risks involved, and that might explain why a lot of Democrat senior elder statesmen, like the former mayor of Philadelphia, Ed Rendell, have come out distancing themselves from the attacks on Romney.
It's interesting, David Smith. How do you feel about this campaign? Because the ads, you know, are saying things like that, you know, they've been outsourcing jobs when he was boss at Urbane Capital, you know, helped companies outsource jobs, take away jobs from Americans. And it's been established that, in fact, that happened. They did do some of that, but it was after Romney's tenure there. I mean, is that dishonesty?
Look, I think private equity is a bit of a red herring. I mean, everyone seems to like it or have no problem with it when the economy's going fine. I mean, this is just a fairly predictable attack by Obama. But I will say about the class warfare thing, the Republicans are complaining about Barack Obama playing the class warfare card, but this is all that the Tea Party has been doing for the last 3 years, saying that all these various leeches in the welfare system and the unions and public sector unions are looting America and taking resources away from productive job creators. So class warfare is going heavily in both directions. And even though you can't really use the language of, of class warfare, you can certainly tap into the language of resentment. And both sides have been tapping into resentment of what their base is perceived to be elites.
Well,
for the Democrats, it's economic elites. For the Republicans, it's intellectual elites. But it's anti-elitism both ways.
Has there also, Tom Switzer, been some dishonesty on the Republican side? I just accused the Obama campaign of doing that, in that they've spent 4 years hammering Obama about his being un-American, about, you know, questioning his birth certificate. I mean...
Sure, I think they're a noisy fringe led by the likes of Donald Trump, who's now damaged goods as a result of that campaign. I mean, you're quite right. 12 months ago, thanks to people like Donald Trump, there was a fringe conspiracy in America. But I think that although they're very vocal in some primaries, they don't represent middle America. And ultimately, this campaign will come down to those independents. And the very qualities, getting back to David's point, the very qualities that have hurt Mitt Romney among the Republican heartland, he's been prone to being conciliatory and compromising. I think they're the very qualities that will actually help him with independent voters on election day.
All right, we've only got a few minutes. David Smith, will Mitt Romney's Mormonism be a negative for Americans?
Yes, it absolutely will. His Mormonism was a major factor in the primaries. I mean, this was often obscured by the supposed divide between the Tea Partiers and the moderates, but actually that divide also broke down along religious grounds between Christians who just don't feel that in good conscience they could have voted for Romney in the primary because he is a Mormon, and between those who don't think that religion is an issue. Now, because of the fact that in the general election there are still 25% of Americans, most of them Republicans, who think that Barack Obama is a Muslim, that imperative to vote against Obama may outweigh the anti-Mormonism for a lot of them. But in many of these states, in places like Iowa, Colorado, Ohio, just a few thousand evangelicals possibly staying home because they just can't even stomach the choice between Obama and Romney would be enough to lose Romney the election.
John Hart, just finally, another huge factor will be campaign finance. Who's winning that race at the moment, as far as you can tell?
Oh, there's no doubt Romney's winning it, and winning it as a result of the Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago that freed up corporations to spend as much money as they wanted on independently of a candidate, so-called independently. It's giving him an edge that Obama had the edge in 2008, but the whole campaign financing system has changed. But then, you know, it's happened in the past that the candidates who spend the most money don't necessarily win the election. So just having those resources isn't going to guarantee Romney a victory in the campaign.
But as you said, I mean, Obama was a master of fundraising, and particularly through the internet and very small donations. Is that all not working this time?
Well, no, that's working well, but he's just out of his league compared to the amount of money the corporate industry is giving one way or another to the Romney campaign. I mean, it really actually accounted for Romney's victories in the primaries, and it will give him a very strong platform in the election proper. Money counts, but it doesn't always determine the result.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to give your prediction, if you could, 4 months out. John Hart, who do you think is going to win?
Haven't a clue.
Haven't a clue. Tom Switzer?
I'll probably lean towards Romney, but only because of the dissatisfaction level among a lot of independents in those swing states.
David Smith?
Obama, unless there is a double-dip recession.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Tom Switzer, David Smith and Dr. John Hart in Canberra, thanks for joining us.